The opening words is a recording of Michael Dowd's last talk here at the church. It's the first 3 minutes of his talk. He passed away in October of last year, and I think what he had to say at the beginning of his talk has a lot more poignance in light of that knowledge. So, let's try it.
On this topic of parenting and grandparenting in contracting, crazy-making times, this is fundamentally, I think, the most important issue of my life now. And for my remaining days, weeks, months, if I'm graced to have years, I don't think I've got decades, but in my remaining time, this is the heart of the message, which is how to communicate to young people, but also especially to parents and to grandparents. What is needed in these times? It's not more hopium. Hopium is not just what gives you hope, but it's hoping for things that are actually impossible, things that would require breaking the laws of physics, biology, or ecology, truly impossible hopes. It's basically hoping for things that give you comfort in the short run, but because what you're hoping for basically encourages exactly what has caused ecocide in the first place, the main things that have caused us to collapse the biosphere and the climate and everything else, because it banks on those it's impossible hopes. So it's not about hopium. And many people get the wrong impression. They think that it's all about either I gotta have hope or I'm doomed. I think hope and doom, hope and fear are the only two options. That's why my life is now devoted to post-doom. Hope-free is the way Stephen Jenkinson, the legendary grief walker, speaks about it. Our time requires us to be hope-free, he says, to burn through the false choice of being hopeful or hopeless. They're both a part of the same con job. Grief is required to proceed. So I'd like to say, it's really built on, I want to talk about three things. Accepting what we cannot change, the old 12-step prayer, God, life, reality, universe. Grant me the serenity to accept the things that I can't change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. A lot of people don't know the next line that Reinhold Niebuhr penned. Living one day at a time, accepting one moment at a time, cherishing hardship as the pathway to peace. So what? So the first thing I want to say to all of us who are parents or grandparents or simply involved in the lives of young people in any capacity is that it's not too late. It's not too late to be a loving person. It's not too late to be a generous, compassionate contribution to your communities. It's not too late to make a profound difference in lessening the suffering that other people are experiencing and other species are experiencing.
Okay, so you've probably heard some version of the story of Pandora, the Greek myth. In that popular version, Pandora opens a box containing all the ills and evils of the world, lets them out, and at the bottom of the box was what? Hope. That's right. Now, if this sounds a little like the story of the Garden of Eden and Eve, it's not a coincidence. Men have been blaming women for everything that's wrong in the world for millennia. But there's actually a lot more to this story that you haven't heard, and I'm going to tell it in good Unitarian fashion, that is, by overly complexifying it with some Greek etymologies, some sexual innuendo, and a little anthropology thrown in for fun. So the myth of Pandora actually starts with another myth, that of Prometheus. And Prometheus' story begins with him observing that human beings are making sacrifices to the gods and burning whole animals in order to make these sacrifices. And as a result, the humans are going hungry. So he convinces Zeus, the king of the gods, to accept just part of the sacrifice. And then humans can have the rest. This was the first separation of the sacred from the profane. And Zeus got to choose which part he wanted. So Prometheus, in his craftiness, the Greeks really loved craftiness in their heroes. So think about like the Trojan horse and Odysseus. So Prometheus made one pile with the meat and another pile with the bones, but he covered the meat up with the hide of the animal, and on the bones he put all the fat. So when Zeus came along, he saw the pile with the bones and the fat, and he thought, oh, well, that looks more appetizing than that furry thing over there. I'll take that. And he left the meat for the mortals. But Zeus wasn't stupid, so eventually he realized he had been tricked, and he was angry. So he took fire away from humans. Now, keep in mind, they already had fire, but he took it away from them. Prometheus then went and stole it back. And the story says he carried it in a hollow stalk so that it wouldn't be extinguished. This tracks the likely history of the domestication of fire, which began with humans noticing that fire was caused probably by lightning strikes. And lightning was a manifestation of Zeus. So fire was his to give and to take away. Prometheus' gift was the knowledge of how to keep the fire alive and carry it from one place to another without extinguishing it. And with the knowledge of keeping fire alive, Prometheus brought all the sciences and arts that made civilization possible, and that wouldn't have been possible without fire. He brought the tools of civilization, and ever since, Prometheus has been a symbol of human progress. One more thing that Prometheus brought was the gift of prophecy, the ability to discern the future, to see what's going to happen. And not coincidentally, his name, Prometheus, means in Greek forethought, to know in advance. But when Zeus learned that Prometheus had stolen fire back for the humans, he decided to curse both Prometheus and the humans. Prometheus, he chained to a rock. And as for humans, he came up with his own crafty curse. He said, I will give men as the price for their fire an evil thing in which they may be glad of heart while they embrace their own doom. And that's when he created Pandora, whose name means all gifts. It's kind of an ambiguous name. And he gave Pandora as a bride to the brother of Prometheus, whose name was Epimetheus, which means afterthought. So you've got Prometheus, who is forethought, and Epimetheus, who is afterthought. Now, Prometheus warned his younger brother not to accept any gifts from Zeus, but Epimetheus, his name was afterthought, ignored his brother's advice. And so Zeus, as a wedding gift, had given to Epimetheus a jar with something in it. And there were two jars in Zeus's palace. One of them had all good things, and one of them had all bad things. And nobody knew which one Zeus gave as a wedding gift here. So Zeus gave this couple one of these jars, and in later retellings it becomes a box, because we don't tend to carry things around in jars anymore. We do in boxes. And then Pandora ended up opening up the jar. In some retellings, though, it was actually Epimetheus who opened up Pandora's jar, which is probably a sexual allusion. And then all the ills and sorrows of mortal life were let out into the world, and the last thing in the jar was hope. And I've always wondered, what was hope doing in the jar with all of the curses? Zeus had said that the gift of fire came with a price, with a curse. And a lot of people have misunderstood that story, thinking that Pandora was the curse, or women were the curse. But the poet Aeschylus explains that when Prometheus was chained to the rock, Zeus caused the mortals to cease to foresee their own doom. So Prometheus, forethought, is chained to a rock, so human beings can no longer see ahead. And as a result, he caused blind hopes to dwell within their breasts. Humankind lost the gift of foresight, and all that was left to them was hindsight and the ambiguously named Pandora, all gifts. Hope was in the jar not because it was a blessing, but because it was another one of Zeus's curses. Unlike the other curses, human beings embraced this one. Hope is a curse to the extent that it keeps us from foreseeing our own doom. It keeps us chained to our fate as surely as Prometheus was chained to the rock. The moral of this story is that when we trade foresight for hope, we end up embracing our own destruction. So, I think Barb Langell has a superpower, which some of you may know, and it is to get people to do things that they might not ordinarily want to do. So, she convinced my wife Ruth to join the church after 13 years, something I was never able to do. And when she asked me to talk, I was honestly ready to tell her I was taking a break from speaking in the pulpit. But then she said she wanted me to speak about my friend and mentor, Michael Dowd, and I couldn't say no. Michael passed away suddenly and unexpectedly in October of last year. He was only 64, and he had been staying in New York with a friend while his father was hospicing. Just 2 days after Michael's father died, Michael himself died in his sleep as a result of a massive heart attack. Michael was to me and to many, many people an inspiration and a mentor in his writing, in his speaking, in his activism, but even more in how he lived his life. Some of you may already be familiar with Michael Dowd. Depending on when you first encountered him, you may know him for different things. You may remember him if you encountered him years ago as a Christian pastor who was passionate about science and wrote a book called Thank God for Evolution. You may know him later as a post-Christian religious naturalist who gave a TEDx talk about reconciling science and spirituality. Or you may know him as a climate activist. Or maybe you know him for what he was most passionate about near the end of his life, which was something called post-doom. Post-doom is Michael's term for a philosophy which starts with a radical acceptance of worst-case scenarios for our civilization and our species, and combines that with an incorrigible love of life and other people. Michael's personal evolution actually roughly tracked my own, each stage kind of building on the other, from Christianity to religious naturalism to environmental activism to post-doom. I first became aware of Michael through my work in the naturalistic pagan community. At that time, I knew him as a progressive Christian minister and an eco-theologian. He was an evangelist of something called the Great Story, or the Epic of Evolution. The Great Story is the history of the universe, starting with the Big Bang and leading to the present moment. It teaches us that we are an interconnected part of nature, that our lives are a small but integral part of the evolution of the universe, and that we're related to one another in one large family, not just human beings, but animals, to plants, and even to the earth and the sky. Michael's work promoting the Great Story would be the foundation for his later activism and for what later became post-doom. In 2019, Michael's focus shifted away from mainstream climate activism as he realized the depth and breadth of cultural and economic change that would be needed to avoid a climate catastrophe. And he grew increasingly pessimistic about the possibility of that change actually happening. He was profoundly influenced in this by the work of William Catton, whose 1980 book was called Overshoot. Everywhere Michael went, he mentioned this book. Michael's pessimism is actually not as radical of a position as it was in 1980 or even just a few years ago. With the hottest month ever being recorded this past July, and the Canadian wildfires turning the skies here in the Midwest orange, it's easier to imagine that we're on the verge of an apocalypse of some kind. Scientists last year announced that we have exceeded 6 of 9 planetary boundaries, all 9 of which are necessary to make this planet habitable to human beings. Just a few years ago, it was 4 of 9 that we had surpassed. Many policy advisors are now saying that we need to focus on resilience and adaptation because a radically different climate is now inevitable. Meanwhile, academics and a lot of news sources are starting to take civilizational collapse as a serious topic. This message entered the mainstream a few years ago with the publication of Davis Wallace Wells' book, The Uninhabitable Earth, Roy Scranton's book, Learning to Die in the Anthropocene, and I like the title of this one, We're Doomed, Now What? Jonathan Franzen's New York article, What If We Stop Pretending? And Jeff Gibbs and Michael Moore's 2019 documentary, Planet of the Humans. This was all in 2019. Michael devoted the last years of his life helping people to accept that our civilization is on an unstoppable downward spiral, and to move beyond that doom to what he called post-doom. He taught us, as you heard him say in the opening words, that it's the very urge to cling to hope in progress and the faith in technology that's driving us faster and faster towards our own annihilation. But he encouraged us not to stop there, and to move beyond doom and gloom to what he called post-doom, which he defined as, he had 3 definitions, because Michael never lacked for words. What opens up when we remember who we are and how we got here, that's talking about the epic of evolution. Accept the inevitable, that all people die and all civilizations decline. Honor our grief and prioritize what is pro-future and soul-nourishing. Another definition he gave was a fierce and fearless reverence for life and expansive gratitude, even in the midst of abrupt climate mayhem, runaway collapse of societal harmony, and the health of the biosphere and business as usual. And more simply, just living meaningfully, compassionately, and courageously no matter what. As part of his work, Michael recorded conversations with over 100 people on this topic. You can find it at postdoom.org, I think. Some of these people you might recognize. Paul Ehrlich was the author of The Population Bomb. Joanna Macy, the permaculturalist David Holmgren. William Rees, who was the person who coined the term ecological footprint. And Richard Rohr, and many, many others, including me. He did an interview with me. Michael's work paralleled that of many others, including Jem Bendell, whose 2018 deep adaptation paper has actually become a movement now. But where Bendell's work is more policy-oriented, Michael's message is explicitly spiritual. I know a lot of people listening to Michael's talks, and maybe some people here who heard his last talk for this congregation. A lot of people get stuck on the part of his talks where he talks about how it's too late to save the world as we know it, and don't really hear what he says after that. And honestly, I'll say I think sometimes Michael maybe emphasized the doom a little too much in his talks. But the doom was really just the preface to his real message, was that it's not too late to love the world. And that's what he said at the end of the clip that I played for you. It's not too late. Michael encouraged us to stop denying and bemoaning our fate and embrace our mortality, our collective mortality and our individual mortality. He taught us by word and example to celebrate our place in the great story, the epic of evolution, to honor the land we inhabit, and to be of service however we can. He urged us to consume less energy, less stuff, less stimulation, and cause less suffering. He called that less, L-E-S-S-S, an extra S. And he counseled us to express care, gratitude, regret, and compassion with everyone in our lives. And he challenged us to contribute to the well-being of both human and other than human beings that we share our communities with. In short, he invited us at the end of the world to love the world. And he didn't just say it, he really lived it. In his work, Michael was supported and encouraged and enabled in myriad ways by his partner and his wife, Connie Barlow, who also has spoken here. In addition to her work as a science educator, an environmental activist, and a leader in the assisted migration movement, Connie edited Michael's videos to make them more effective communication tools. Over time, Michael became a friend and mentor to me. He and Connie spoke at our congregation here on multiple occasions. They lived in the last years of Michael's life, they lived an itinerant lifestyle, so they went from place to place, moving across the country, staying at people's houses, and for different speaking engagements that he had, hundreds of engagements over the years. And this enabled him to cultivate deep and meaningful relationships with people all over the country, and also to indulge his love of wild nature. Everywhere Michael went, he made a point to swim in a natural body of water. And when he visited us here, he made a point to go swimming in Lake Michigan. Michael had a unique gift for lifting up other people and connecting like-minded folks. I think that was at least as important, if not more so, than his actual writing and speaking. And I was one of those many, many people who Michael encouraged and whose work he promoted. He even recorded a reading of my book on this topic, and Michael has a voice made for radio, so that was really nice. He's recorded audio editions of many, many essays and even full-length books. Michael had a contagious enthusiasm and one of the most generous spirits I've ever met. I don't know of anybody else who could have delivered his message with all of its doom as effectively as he did because of how he lived his life. He embodied his message of post-doom in every way. And his death challenges those of us who knew him to live in a similar way. So shortly before Michael died, I had a picture hanging, I had this thing hanging on my wall. It's kind of an ancestor tree with people who've inspired me over the course of my life. And on the top are people who are still alive in color, and at the bottom are people in black and white who've passed away either long before I was born or during my lifetime. And when I put this up last year, I had a thought that the next person I might be moving from the top to the bottom might be Michael. He's down here now. And I didn't know why I had that thought, and then I remembered my premonition probably originated actually with Michael himself, because a few months before he died, he sent out this email, which I know may be difficult to read, but the subject line says, "I can die now," smiley face. "My core message will live on." And he added in the body, "Until the internet or YouTube goes down for good, of course." Michael did embrace gallows humor. What he called his core message was contained in a video talk he gave to the Canadian Association of the Club of Rome. The title of that was "The Big Picture, Beyond Hope and Fear." I think it's a great blessing to have had that feeling of accomplishment before the end of his life. I hope to have that feeling as well myself. But I have to say, I don't think Michael's impact can be summed up in a video, in that video or in any video. His greatest message for me was in how he lived his life, like one big hug. No one who knew Michael would ever think he was a despairing person. I know he didn't like the word hope. I was always railing about hopium, but he wasn't a hopeless person either. I think he just had hope for different things. He didn't have hope for capitalism or progress or civilization, but he did have hope for small acts of generosity and compassion. He had hope for love, and he had hope for life. Whatever you think about capitalism or civilization or progress or what our chances are as a species, I think Michael's message still has relevance. We all hold on to faith or hope in things that are really no longer working for us. We continue to believe in systems that are not just broken, but irredeemable. And our belief in those systems and our hope in those things keeps them alive and prolongs the harm that they do. It may be a relationship, it may be a family, it may be a government or an economic system or a religion. It may be a church or a certain way of doing church. Whatever it is, there comes a time when we need to let go, when we need to stop feeding those systems with our life energy so that we can find new faith and new hope in something else, something more life-sustaining. Maybe that something will be less ambitious and less grand than our earlier hope, but it may also be more down to earth, more real, and in that way, more beautiful. The way Michael Dowd lived his life was proof of this. Thank you. Our closing words are by Michael Dowd himself. He wrote this in 2014. It was called The Gifts of Death. This is just an excerpt, but without the death of stars, there would be no planets and no life. Without the death of creatures, there would be no evolution. Without the death of elders, there would be no room for children. Without the death of plants and animals, there would be no food. Without the death of old ways of thinking, there would be no room for the new. The gifts of death are wisdom, creativity, and the flow of cultural change. The gifts of death are the urgency to act, the desire to fully be and become. The gifts of death are joy and sorrow, laughter and tears. The gifts of the acceptance of death are lives that are fully and exuberantly lived, then graciously and gratefully given up for now and forevermore. Amen.